Peace and love, y'all. Naeem here. Just wanted to make a video condensing and bringing together some of my data that I collected on this North Pole Mount Meru target. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with what remote viewing is and how it works, you can check a link in the description. I have videos, kind of explaining how this, how this all works. I worked this target blind. This is part of a competition. This was just a fun target that was set up on the remote viewing Discord. So I had no idea what this target was. I was blind. Um, there was no hints that this was some kind of esoteric or mystery target or anything like that. This could have been anything from some flowers in a field to Apollo 11 or something like that. Okay, it could have been anything. This target could have been anything in the world. So I just want to get that out of the way. You know what I mean? I wasn't told this was the North Pole. Um, Second thing, remote viewing doesn't prove anything about a target. So if a remote viewer says something about a target, it doesn't mean it's true. Okay, so you got to find, there's got to be real evidence in real life to back up the things that the remote viewer says, right? So even in the military where this was developed for and used, they wouldn't use remote viewing data alone to act on something. They would use multiple sources of intel and corroborate it together with remote viewing data and act. Okay, so anything that is described here should be tried to it should be correlated with things in real life. You know what I mean? Or some kind of evidence. There's travelers journals, voyages that happened in the past. I'll put links to those in the description. So remote viewing is only as good as the feedback you get most of the time. Okay, so I did this session completely blind. The video is on YouTube. It's on my channel. The link's in the description. Here's the tasking that this is what the tasker, the person who set up the target, their intention. This was their intention for me, what they wanted me to perceive when I did the remote viewing. So it says, Q, move to the optimum position of the Earth's North Pole and describe the surroundings as it is today, present time. Primarily, the viewer will pick up on and describe his or her physical and conceptual impressions of the North Pole. So, as a remote viewer going into this session, all I knew about this target was the target is P300420. Okay, so working this target number, the tasker is expecting me to describe what is the physical and conceptual impressions that I get at the North Pole, present day. You know what I mean? The secondary part of the tasking was the viewer will explore a wider area of the North Pole to see if there's any life forms that pique his or her interest. So it's also, as like a subtask, is that if there's any life that's pertinent to this area, the viewer may perceive that as well. Okay, so I wasn't told any of this up front. I'm just trying to explain this. This was all hidden from me. I was only given this number. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, you can see the maps here. These are older maps from drawn up by some of the old cartographers who have journals explaining taking voyages to the North Pole. Okay, I'll put the links in the description. I can't, this video will go on forever if I try and go into all the details, but here's a short summary of some of the things that are described in a lot of these accounts. Okay, so mountain ranges. A lot of these explorers say there's large islands with mountain ranges at the North Pole. They say there's vegetation. They say that there's running flows of water, some of which are very rapid, moving indrawn flows of water and outflowing streams of water coming out of this North Pole area. Some describe a whirlpool in the center, as well as a magnetic mountain, or a mountain with some kind of magnetic properties. It's often called Mount Meru, and so I use that in the title. There's also descriptions of it having inhabitants that aren't human. So, you know what I mean? Other types of beings that inhabit some of these islands closer to the North Pole. This is from, explorers' logs and stuff like that. So that's the stuff that we have some kind of uh, historical reference for. You know what I mean? Whether those journals are 100% true, we don't know. Okay, so it's an interesting experiment to see what happens when you remote view these things. So now that that's out of the way, we know what the kinds of things that ancient explorers, maybe not ancient, but the explorers of old were describing. So now I want to jump into my data and kind of show the things in my session that actually match up pretty well with the descriptions from the cartographers in the past. So yeah, let's get into this. We'll start off with the overall area, the land, the water. So here's a map, one of the maps that was depicted in the tasking. So as you can see, as described in the opening part, many of the explorers described the magnetic mountain, some kind of mountain in the center surrounded by water, flows coming in and out, mountain ranges. These were the main descriptions that I found going through this information over the last couple of weeks. So here's a look at some of the drawings that I did. The top right drawing here is this is my S3 sketch. So this is a compilation of small pieces of data that I gathered throughout the session, and I assembled them on one page. So this first drawing here on the top right isn't exactly a visual image that I saw all at once. This is many small visuals that I intuitively pieced together to create kind of like the basis for my session. So moving down on the bottom left is this is my view. This is what I saw when I looked at the land. All right, trying to look at this land that I got. So I had basically vegetation, water, mushy, wet. I had points of like Olive Garden even, you know what I mean? So lush vegetation, sense of pristine, like preserved land, sense of secured and off limits. So tying back to what I was saying earlier about confirmable details and things that we don't know. We know that the North Pole is protected by certain military systems. They have something called the Dew Line, which is a radar system that's allegedly supposed to be tracking, enemies that come over the North Pole or something. They replaced that more recently with a different kind of radar system. But the North Pole in general is off limits. You can't just go there. So yeah, I got this idea of no off limits. I even got the term no man's land, and this was interesting because that term was actually used in some of these journals describing the area. They say that there's no humans that inhabit this area, but there's other types of life. So that was interesting. That I found that interesting that I got that point of no man's land, off limits. Not a lot of people get to come here. That was the sense I got. And then I had the sense of electromagnetic signal and attenuation, generation of attenuation. Now this is what happens when the needle on your magnet starts wiling out in these areas. That's a form of attenuation. So when it comes to confirmable aspects of the North Pole, we know there's a signal in the North Pole. The compass needle points there, so there is we know there's a magnetic aspect to this, and in my session I'm describing an electromagnetic signal and attenuation being generated from this land and the structure in this area. So so far so good, you know what I mean? Yeah, so but then interestingly, the technology part was what started pulling me onto the target, this whole idea of the signal, the electromagnetic signal. So following that route, I had a visual of this gap in between the land And if you compare it to the pictures of the maps, you can see there's like the swath cut into the land where water runs out. And I even had the sense of like waterfall when I was probing this. But moving on to the bottom right image here, this is the water gestalt, and this is when I try to isolate just the water and get a visual of it so I can investigate it. And here I saw water flowing out of an opening, and then at other times I saw it flowing in, and I get the sense of flow, generation, and frequency, pulse, and I even got the sense of like going green, like kind of like green energy. You know what I mean? So this is also something that was described in the travelers' journals, the voyages of these water flows that move in and out, indrawn and outdrawing water flows that were treacherous for some travelers. Some couldn't make it. Some got pulled in. Some couldn't even sail in these areas allegedly because of the roughness of the water. So I thought that was interesting. So in terms of physical descriptions of the area, my session data seems to align pretty closely with the journals of the explorers that are described in the past. So here's a closer look at the my drawing of the land there. I said it was natural elements, kind of like the steep part of the land felt natural and bumpy, and then there's some kind of like man-made structure at the top, this curved type shape that I'm drawing at the top. So here's some of the data that I got on the signal part. Probing for the signal, I got the sense of like an outward spread of a signal, a broadcast. I got the sense of attenuation again, of synchronized, a connection, a network, a pulse, a frequency, emanating from this central spot. I drew this little sketch here to help illustrate, what I was experiencing. Moving on to, I just wanted to show some of these depictions of kind of like the ancients' cosmos, their ideas of what the cosmos were. Cosmos was formed and how it looks. So a lot of the ancient depictions show, a domed, enclosed world with some kind of mountain-like, what would the word be? Some kind of rising feature in the center. That's the main theme throughout a lot of these ancient depictions. So here's the Mayan cosmos. Here's I think this is a Buddhist type. I might be mistaken, but the thing I want you to take in here is that they all share a very similar theme of raised, some kind of raised feature and different levels to the raised feature. And usually there's like abodes, like there's houses or homes or cities, up on the raised part or along different planes along the levels of this. Like this one's interesting. They have all these domes, these little domes that go up and down the side of the structure. Here's another one. They basically all have the same theme: rising up, something held high up, and usually there's some kind of dome or some kind of covering over it. So this moves on to my data on the peak. You know what I mean? I saw a domed type shape, a circular feature at the top of this structure, this raised area. And so taking a closer look at it, I saw this very clearly. This was at the top of a mountain, so to speak, raised very high up. It was like a plateau, and I saw this domed, wide, flat, domed structure, and I get a sense of observation and astronomy here. So once again, this ties into this mountain is allegedly supposed to be right underneath the North Pole, right? So, I'm picking up on the sense of astronomy, observation. I got a sense of vantage, being on higher ground, being able to, being higher than everything else around you, which is also another description from some of the old accounts. I got the sense of a biome. You know what I mean? Like uh, a contained life sphere. You know what I mean? Like they actually call it biome. You know what I mean? When it's like a ecosystem of life. You know what I mean? So I got the sense of a biome contained these kind of things at the top of this mountain. And I did get magnetic device, magnetic mountain, and stuff like this in the session. So it's interesting stuff. So in this session, I had sense of magnetic signals, water, land, pristine. I had moments of off limits, top secret, stuff like that. I got data on this. This area is off limits and it's secret or hidden because it's too shocking for people to take in. People would be shocked. They wouldn't be able to handle this kind of revelation. This is the when probing for the reason this is hidden. That's what I got. But coming back to the domes now, this is the interesting thing about it. I saw. This is speculation, okay? But throughout my sessions, I kept seeing domed enclosures. Okay, so I saw more than one dome at some times. Other times, I see single domes. At the top of that, the peak of this mountain, I definitely saw a single one up there. But at other times in my session, I see these multiple domes, and I get the sense of biome, containment, and that was interesting because in one of my sessions, I saw the face of an old man with glasses, and it was pretty clear. And I drew this man's face, just sketched it down quickly. It was totally out of the blue, and the whole session I'm describing land and water and all these things, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing this old dude's face, old a Caucasian man wearing glasses. And I also got a quick flash of a person, which to me at the time looked like they were like climbing something, like outstretched hands, outstretched feet, hanging onto the side of a structure. So I wrote rock climber or skydiver or something. I didn't know what this meant, but I just drew it down. I sketched it down. Fast forward now, I'm working on the whiteboard in the video that I posted, and when I was probing this visual of the dome structure, I got the word Fuller. And at the time, if you watch the video, you can hear me say Fuller, and I kind of just breeze over it. I'm just like, I don't know what that means, and I continue on with the session. But after my session was done, looking over my data, and I saw that part where I said Fuller, it kind of like triggered me, and I remembered that there's an architect named Buckminister Fuller, and he makes what's called the geodesic dome. That's like one of his big famous things that he did. And so, I kind of like, in that moment, I went back and looked at my drawing, and I was kind of shocked to see that the man that I saw was Buckminster Fuller. And, I saw someone hanging on the side of a structure, and here on the bottom right, you could see, like, this is what this man did. He was an architect. He was climbing up on things, building things. And so on the left here, you can see some of his ideas, the things he wanted to do. He was into wanted to build these kind of like biodomes. It was supposed to be like the greatest use of like volume and space and materials. You know what I mean? So I thought that was interesting that I got a man's last name and I saw his face in the session. And one of the parts of the tasking, like I described, was to that the viewer would also pick up on any life that was pertinent to this target. So, I started to speculate at this moment that, maybe Buckminster Fuller has something to do with the North Pole. Maybe they use his technology there, or something about his technology maybe being used at the North Pole. So that was kind of like a little conclusion that I came to, because, this came up repeatedly in my data, and it's totally unexpected. But, most of my other data seems to be on target. So I went and just did some digging around, started researching Buckminster Fuller a bit, and surprisingly, he actually mentions building something and trying to get it put in the North Pole. So, I'm not saying this proves that his thing is there or anything like that. But it's an interesting lead, and maybe I'd say that if people are interested in the North Pole and what's there, um, I'm speculating based off my data that Buckminster Fuller, his technology may be being implemented in the North Pole somewhere, because I had data of life traveling to this area and kind of like renovating it, repairing it. So, that's my speculation, because I clearly saw these domes many times. There's definitely domes there. Um, whether the Fuller hint is just whether it's just similar, or if it's actually a lead that they actually used his technology there, I don't know. That will be, I guess, maybe hopefully unveiled in the future at some point. But I thought I'd share the data either way. So to all the people out there researching the North Pole, look into Buckminster Fuller, because I think he might have something to do with what happened there or what's going on there. Yeah. For the signal, I got a sense of a distance coverage, a sense of hydroelectric. So this is another speculation that I'm putting forth here, that the technology being used in the North Pole is hydroelectric. And the signal has a high placement, something to do with the altitude. The magnetic parts of this target that I was picking up on feel like it has to do with a magnetic mountain that produces internally this and distributes this magnetic signal. And I got a sense of like industrial device. Yeah, so I'm going to play this clip here of Buckminster Fuller talking about his structures that he wants to get built in the North Pole.
Find out what were the great comprehensive patterns operating in the universe, how then the metaphysical man as mind could become the master of the physical. So I then said, I think my first grand strategy of finding out how to use the world's resources so they will take care of everybody would come back then to how to take care of his living equipment. This brought me then to what I call the Dymaxion Tower House, the 4D Tower House. And it was a 10-deck building which was so light and so strong as finally engineered that it could be carried by the Graf Zeppelin, which was about to be built at that time, and was perfectly flyable economically to the North Pole where it could be anchored. I gave myself then the task of designing a building which would house an airplane maintenance crew, which we'd be able to install in remote places in the Arctic, so that we'd have stepping stone flights to Europe via the Arctic.
So in conclusion, I feel like this was a decent session. It was a good session. A lot of my target work was pertinent to descriptions of the past, of the Voyagers. It seems like I'm describing the older idea of what the North Pole is, not the modern idea of just like water, because I'm clearly describing peaked features, pristine, off limits, top secret, green, pristine, lush vegetation, elevated areas, water flows, magnetic synchronization, pulse, and frequency. So yeah, I just want to share this data for people who are interested. I was blind to this. I did not. This is not my opinion on on the North Pole. This is information that I intuitively collected while blind to this target. So hopefully that's interesting. Feel free to leave any questions or comments in the description. Peace and love, y'all.